Well, GCN is doing their typical GCN does science again, but this time they're doing it with the Lotus bike, and they're comparing the Lotus bike, which is a bike from the 90s, a very aerodynamic bike that still holds the grandfather hour record, which means what's happened is the UCI have put that record aside because they changed the rules, and now those bikes, or those design of bikes that we used in the 90s, like the Super bike and the Lotus bike, which had a one-piece frame, are now not allowed to be used with the new UCI rules. So you can't use that for the hour record. You can't use it in any UCI events because they basically banned that, and they made some new regulations which now specifically limit the frame sizes and the triangular frame and the depth of those legs of that triangular section. So it makes these bikes outside the rules. So those records that have been done have been grandfathered. So let's roll that intro and let's have a talk about what did GCN do with this very, very famous Lotus bike. And what they did is they compared it to a modern day road race bike. Now what GCN did, as they say, do science, which is inverted commas, they did a section of road which they didn't specify, and they compared it to the Abrea. Now the Abrea bike actually doesn't comply with the UCI rules because there's a cowling that fits on the bottom of the down tube, which, because it's a fairing, that under the UCI rules makes that bike now illegal. You have to run it without the fairing. But I do believe in this GCN does science, they had that fairing connected. So both of the bikes in their formats were illegal. But what they were trying to prove is, does a modern day bike outperform a bike from the 90s that was considered to be one of the fastest bikes ever made? Well, that's where it all comes a little bit undone, because they didn't give any specifications to how they did this. They did give some times at the end. Si said he was 1 second slower on the Abrea, but Ollie was 12 seconds faster on the Abrea, which kind of doesn't make any sense at all. They did mention that they didn't fit the bikes, they didn't change, and I can kind of understand that because this Lotus bike is a collector's piece and it has all the original equipment on it. And obviously the owner doesn't want that to be fiddled with because it's probably worth a hell of a lot of money. It's a collector's piece. But it was pretty good of the guy. He apparently has a bike shop and he lent it to GCN. So GCN had this bike, and unfortunately they were limited to using what was on the bike, which they didn't state. They should have clarified, hey, look, these were the tyres. They're the tyres from the original tyres, whatever, the wheels and all this sort of stuff. But in the reality, the times that they got just do not make any sense, because the Lotus bike had a TT setup on it with some forward bars on it that you have like this, whilst the Abrea was just a normal drop handlebar. Now we do know that when you use the TT style of bikes, you narrow your body, you're just more aerodynamic. Before we even talk about the bike, you have got a better aero position. And the bike also is a one-piece frame, which what it does is, because it's a one-piece frame, when the wind hits it, it travels over the whole surface and then turbulates at the back. There's not a number of separate pieces going through the air, causing more turbulence. So that's why those bikes were banned from years gone by, because they were so fast. Now, what we really need to take GCN seriously on this is we need to have all of the things that they controlled. Now, they didn't say what the course was. They didn't say how long the course was. They said they were just going to maintain the same wattage. I don't believe they even stated what that wattage was, if it was different between Si or Ollie. They didn't give any information about, on the course, did they need to stop? How long was the course? Was it 5 minutes long? Was it an hour long? Was there stop signs? Was there traffic furniture there that they need to accommodate for slowing down, going around corners, all those sorts of things? They didn't do that, because normally when people do these sorts of tests, they'll go to some sort of course where you will be going upwind, downwind, or it'll be like a velodrome sort of thing, even though that velodrome may be outdoors. And I know there's a velodrome somewhere in the UK that is used a lot for doing these type of tests, but they didn't choose to do that. They just used some open road from the filming that we could see. They didn't specify anything about the course whatsoever. And they also didn't specify about the tyres or what was on the Abrea or anything. So the controls that they may or may not have put in place, first of all, were not addressed or acknowledged or given to the audience. And they didn't say what of those controls could have been variables. Like, let's just say they did the test in the morning, the wind changed and it was blowing the other way. We don't know that. Or it could have been the other way. It could have been against the one test against another test, because obviously they didn't ride the bikes at the same time, and Ollie and Si didn't ride the bike at the same time because it's just one bike. So all these things need to be given to the audience if you're going to do science, as they call it. Because what a lot of people don't realize is when people do studies, now this can be to do with anything. It might not be to do with bikes, it could be to do with cars, it could be to do with a transformer overheating, it could be to do with anything, how long a light lasts before it blows, even just doing a survey of people in public. And what you normally do is you have to write down all those controls, and normally that is part of the report or study that you would do. And you've probably heard about peer reviews, and then what you would do is you'd give that study to someone who's separate, who also has expertise in that field, and they do a peer review and they go, oh, look, you know, the reason why this could be biased is because of this, this, and this, and this. And the peer review then comments on that and comments on the controls, because the controls are massively important. But in this case, not only did there not be given any controls or stated any controls, or it's peer reviewed, but there just wasn't, they weren't told at all what the hell they did. Now, I actually reviewed a test that GC Performance did, and I'll put a link about that up here. I think it's this side here, up here, and I'll put that up there. And GC Performance, one good thing he did, he basically gave all of the information he did, because it was about high pressure versus low pressure, skinny tyres versus wider tyres. And he gave all of the information. All of the information was available when he did that test. Now, you can still say, hey, yeah, the wind varied and all this sort of stuff, but it was done in Florida and it was done on a flat section. So, and he did tell you the time it took that he did the test over, and so forth and so forth. So, yes, there's still variables which were outside of control, and we can argue that may have not been a fair test. But with GCN, they basically gave us zero. They gave us nothing. So that to me is a really poor test that they did when you look at it from a science point of view. And the other thing that really doesn't make any sense is, if that is true, their results were true, it just basically says that all of the things we're doing for triathlon bikes and TT bikes that the pros are doing when they have a TT run, or a triathlon person is doing when he is in a triathlon, that they're completely meaningless, because the Lotus bike is the most aero bike, and it had a TT type cockpit. There's drop handlebars are nowhere near as aero as a tri cockpit. Now, yes, they didn't set it up to fit them perfectly, that's true, but to really get the results they did, there must have been some other factor that was given the Abrea an advantage, and the Abrea wasn't UCI legal either. So that raises some questions for me. So in conclusion, logic tells you that unless of all the things we're doing on bikes, where we're trying to keep the tyre as close to the frame at the back, which other manufacturers done even today with Pinarello. And we're using a TT type cockpit, which the Lotus bike had on, and had the normal aero bars that we have, not drop bars that you would have on a road bike. And the bike still holds the record, the hour record, out of all bikes, even though that now has been grandfathered by the UCI. This bike is exceptionally fast bike. And to really come out and say one specific brand, the Abrea brand, is as good as the Lotus bike, not only is poor science, but it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense if we were going to believe any of the basics about aerodynamics when it comes to cycling. And all those people out there riding triathlon bikes are wasting their time. They should be riding a drop handlebar Abrea because it's just as quick. It just doesn't make any sense. Plus also the Lotus had a disc wheel on the back, which we all know is more aero, and that's just like, we know that because you haven't got the spokes and everything doing all the turbulence. You have a completely solid wheel. The reason why people don't use them normally is because you get a lot of buffeting trying to use those disc wheels. So guys, that's where I'm going to leave it. Leave your comments down below. And if you haven't watched that GCN video, just jump over there and give it a view. And it just really goes to show to me that there is a lot of factors that are happening behind closed doors that are making these type of tests, we do science, become kind of a little bit biased. Well, that's where I'm going to leave it, guys, for today. Leave your comments down below. What do you think? Do you think these modern day bikes are as quick as the Lotus bikes and the super bikes of those designs from years ago where the UCI rules relaxed? Or do you think, hey, there might have been some, or that test was not really done appropriately and the results may have been a bit tainted? Well, that's where I'm going to leave it, guys. I'm going to see you next vid.